Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Brice Pelle. I'm an enterprise support lead at AWS. I work in our enterprise support organization. I've been with AWS a couple of years, and I also dabble in mobile, in everything mobile. So what I would like to do today is talk to everyone here about authentication and authorization, specifically when it has to do with AppSync, AWS AppSync, and Amazon Cognito. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about identity, authentication, authorization. We're going to talk about how those two things can work in conjunction with AWS services like Amazon Cognito for identity and AWS AppSync. How can you secure your APIs? How can you add some granular control to your APIs as well? So let's jump into it. So when you think about identity, most of the time you don't really think about it this way, but identity is really the first thing that your users, when you're building a mobile app, it's the first things that your users really interact with, right? Users come to your web page, they either have to sign in, and if they don't have to sign in some fashion, in one way or another, you still want to manage how your users access your APIs, how they interact with your APIs, right? So it's really mission critical. It can make or break your application. But when we think about identity, there's really a couple of things that means, right? A lot of time we just think about identity as we need to sign in. But identity really encompasses three different things. You've got authentication, right? That's kind of basic, right? It jumps to mind when you talk about that. Your users are going to need to be able to sign in, right? You need to be able to differentiate users. But a lot of times when building modern apps today, you also need to think about things like federation, right? Everybody's been on these websites. You go to a website and they give you an option to sign in with your Facebook identity, with your Google identity, with a social identity. People don't always want to have to recreate passwords, right? That's why we have all these password management apps, because we've got so many passwords. So people want to avoid that. Federation is big. At the same time, if you're dealing with enterprise companies, federation is another thing that they want to use, right? Everybody's heard about single sign-on, being able to access apps without having to sign on all the time if you're on your corporate network or if you provide your corporate identity. Those are things that you have to take into consideration when building applications. Then there's also the authorization piece. So you've identified, you've authenticated a person, an identity, a user. The next step is, what does that mean for your actual application? What should that person be allowed to access? That's what we mean by authorization. We want to make sure that the right set of data is accessed and privileged data is protected, right? If you have an administrator, that's different from a regular day user. You want to be able to authorize them in different ways, right? And I talked a little bit about the fine-grained access control, right? You may have a user and you want a user to access a specific subset of your resources, right? Versus accessing another part of your infrastructure. A simple example is, let's say I have a file system, right? I log into a machine, I should be able to access my home folder. Somebody else should not be able to access my home folder. But we want to be able to nuance that and to authorize to those things. And then the last thing is user management. You're going to interact with users, you're storing that data, but you've got to manage it. So you need an interface that's going to let you manage that easily. What if you need to migrate your users? What if you need to add some additional information about your users? How are you going to do that? You need to be able to do that in a secure way as well. And then you want to be able to monitor how these users are interacting with your application. Now, we say that identity is mission critical. But what we don't always think about is that implementing Auth infrastructure is actually really difficult, right? If you think about the couple of things that I've mentioned, now if you think about what it would take to implement those things, there's a couple of things. And it's not something that's easy to do unless you've got the expertise, right? If we run down the list of things that you need to do, you need to develop a reliable user directory to manage identities. Where are you storing this information? Is it secure? Who has access to it? Are your users trusting you with their information? What are you doing with it? You need to be able to handle user and data and passwords securely. Do you know how to manage passwords, right? Is there anything specific that needs to be done there? Then you need to be able to implement at scale. So you may be starting with an application, and maybe you're expecting a couple of hundreds of users. You know, it's a brand new application. What if your application goes viral? What do you do then, right? How do you manage API access? How do you handle the scale? How do you handle the peak request? Do you need to weigh building big or building small? Those are things that you need to think about. And if you go major, your infrastructure needs to be able to scale with you. Then you want to support the standard, the regular standards that are used in this space. Things like OAuth 2, OpenID, SAML, right, for federation. And these standards keep on getting updated. So when they're updated, you got to update your implementation to meet the requirements. Is that something that you want to take on as part of your application development? You also need to support multiple social identities. I talked about Facebook, Google, but these things are really relevant into space. And then federating with corporate directories for business to business and other type of applications. So all of this is really difficult to do. And when you're building an application, you really want to hit the ground running. You want to get started. You're going to have to make a decision. What do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on building your application, or do you want to focus on identity? Because even though we say identity is mission critical, identity is hard, it's difficult to implement, we don't really see identity as a differentiator, right? Nobody comes to your app and says, oh, wow, they've got a pretty great login screen here. That's not what people focus on. It's not going to differentiate your app from another app into App Store. That's why we have the Amazon Cognito service. With the Amazon Cognito service, you get a service that handles identity management, authorization, and authentication for you. And what we really want to do is allow you and developers to focus on what is special about your application. Focus on those killer features that are really going to set your application apart on the App Store, on wherever your application resides. And then let Cognito handle authentication and identity. So what does Cognito offer you? What does it offer out of the box? Well, we talked about the managed user directory, so it has that. Cognito can be used as an identity provider if you want it to. Cognito can also provide a hosted UI. So if you're not a front-end developer, if you do not know how to design front-end applications, Cognito can help you get started and provide a hosted UI that you can customize easily to meet your theme, the theme of your application, and other requirements that you have. It also supports a federation, so you can federate easily with Google, Facebook, Amazon IDs, SAML, and OAuth, OpenID Connect. Cognito can also vend AWS credentials, so that's really interesting. You can have your users receive temporary credentials to access your AWS resources. That's really interesting. And of course, we then support standard tokens. I talked about OpenID and OAuth 2. So Cognito, after you've authenticated with Cognito, it can return to you a set of tokens that you can then use to access your own systems or to get authorization to access other systems. So when we look at Amazon Cognito, there's a couple of identity management scenarios, typical identity management scenarios that we see. So let me go through them real quick. The first thing that we see is business to consumer, right? So that's the typical application you're building. You're building an application, it's for the mass public, right? We see it used in that fashion. And in this type of implementation, you're looking to do federation with social identities, and you're also looking to allow your users to log in directly to their application. So they can create an account and log into the application. We also see business-to-business scenarios. So this is a scenario where I create an application and it's being used by businesses. Maybe I sell them the application or something, but they want to be able to use this application without their users that they already manage, without them having to sign in again to this application. And they want that to be controlled. So Cognito can support that as well. We also have the business to employee. So this is a setting where you within your organization you are building an application to be used internally. Similar to the business to business, but in this case, you only have one enterprise directory that you're supporting. It's only available for your internal organization. And then we have the IoT scenarios. We're seeing a lot more of these as IoT is really expanding. So you may have a situation where you have a lot of IoT devices. They're using AWS credentials to access your AWS resources, but you also need to manage them. And you manage them via Cognito. You get credentials to access them via Cognito. So this is a prevalent use case that we're starting to see in the field as well. Now, Cognito, when you use it, if you use it to manage your identities, we really want you to be able to own all of the data that Cognito manages. And we want Cognito to be able to handle comprehensive user flows, meaning Cognito is able to handle most of the interactions that people do when it comes to authentication and authorization. So Cognito supports sign up and sign in out of the box. You don't have to do much to get started with that. It supports user profiles. So users are able to retrieve their own profiles, and they can modify their profiles depending on how you've set up your Cognito user pool. It supports forgot password flow as well, so users can easily retrieve their password if they forget it. You don't have to implement that. Supports token-based authentication. So we support JSON, Cognito supports JSON web tokens. We vend those out after you authenticate. We support email or phone number verification. So this is really good when you want to make sure that your users are actually real users. When you want to have that second layer of verification, you can provide an email address or a phone number, and Cognito will make sure, will take care of handling the verification. We also support SMS multi-factor authentication. So if you want to have MFA, another layer of verification, every time a user signs in, that is also possible. And in addition to that, supporting the user flows is good, but Cognito also allows you to manage your user pools, right? So this is your data. They are your users. Cognito allows you to really take ownership of that data and manage it as needed. So we support creating and managing user pools. You can create multiple user pools. You don't have to be limited to one. We support defining custom attributes. So there's a standard set of attributes that we define. But if you want your customers to be able to store certain type of data associated with your attribute, you can also define that. We support per app permissions. So you can have a user pool that supports different type of apps, and you can segregate what user can access what type of app. And you can easily search for your users, whether you have hundreds of thousands of users, and you can easily manage your users, right? So we want users, we want people that are using Cognito to be able to manage their data. It's your data. We want to make sure that you can easily interact with it. So I talked a little bit about the user flows, the comprehensive user flows that we have, right? So we allow users, Cognito allows users to sign in, sign up, sign out, retrieve their information. But Cognito also allows you to customize the flows using Lambda hooks. If you're not familiar with Lambda, Lambda is our serverless service that allows you to deploy code as functions. So you can hook up Lambda functions in these workflows to take specific actions when they're executed, right? So for example, you can define your specific authentication challenges. Let's say you want to specify a secret question that changes every day and that your users should be able to answer before they access your application. Cognito allows you to do that. We also allow you to plug into authentication events, right? So before we authenticate a user, you can do a check and make sure that your business logic is evaluated before we return tokens. You can also add additional claims to the tokens that are returned if you want to dynamically add more information to the tokens that are returned. Cognito supports adding pre-sign-up hooks as well and post-confirmation hooks. So if you have a database or a data repository on your on-premise or somewhere else that you want to update after somebody has signed up, if there's specific messaging that you want to send out, Cognito allows you to do that easily. I talked a little bit about the Java Web Tokens that Cognito returns. So let me talk a bit more about them here. So when you authenticate with Cognito, if you successfully authenticate, Cognito will return to you a set of tokens. Typically, it will return an access token and an identity token. These are Java Web Tokens. If you're not familiar with Java Web Tokens consist of a header, data, and a signature. So the data part holds information that specifies different things depending on what type of token it is. If it's an access token, the access token can be used to authorize requests, including Cognito APIs. So for example, if a user wants to modify some user data that's stored in Cognito, they can submit the access token to get the authorization to update their data, right? So the access token is going to include things like OAuth scopes and Cognito groups. This token expires after an hour. We also provide an identity token. Now, the identity token can be used to gain access to other APIs. You can use it to authenticate towards other services in AWS that support it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It includes information about the user, so it has user profile information, attributes, and Cognito groups. It also expires after an hour. The other thing that it provides is a refresh token. So this is just an opaque blob, but the refresh tokens allows users to receive new tokens without having to sign in every single time. So you get a refresh token, it's cached on your browser, and when your identity tokens and access token expires, it is automatically resubmitted so that you can get new tokens. And this is all done securely. So this is an overview of Cognito. But how does it integrate with AWS AppSync? If you've interacted with AWS AppSync before, you've probably seen that we have several methods of authorization. Looking at them real quick, you can authenticate, you can choose an authorization type consistent of an API key. So the API key helps you easily get started if you're building a demo, if you're interacting with AppSync for the first time and you want to get started quickly, you can use an API key. Then we also support an Open ID Connect, so you can provide any type of IDP that you want to use to authenticate towards Cognito and to verify your authorization. And then we also support AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM, and we support Amazon Cognito User Pool. So let's look at how authorization works with Cognito when you are using Amazon Cognito User Pools. So this is the typical flow that you have. You have a mobile application, you're interacting with Amazon Cognito User Pool, you're interacting with AWS AppSync. So what happens when you access a web application and you want to gain access to AppSync? So the first thing that happens is that you try to authenticate. Authentication is done towards Amazon Cognito User Pool. You send in this is your typical web page. You have username and password. That information is securely sent to Cognito. Cognito validates the information, and if you sign in successfully, JWT tokens are returned. So this is the access key, the access token, the identity token, and the refresh token that we just looked at. That is returned to your web application. So Cognito only interacts with your web application on this interface. When your application gets that information, it can then use the JWT token, the identity token specifically, to gain access to AppSync. And this is simply done by adding the ID token as a header, as an authorization header to the HTTP request that is sent to AppSync. AppSync gets the identity token and validates the identity token, right? So it's not enough to just send a token. AppSync in the back will validate this information with Cognito to make sure that the token is actually valid, right? So that every token consists as I said, a header, a payload, data payload, and a signature. So AppSync can talk into backend with Cognito User Pool to make sure that your signature is actually valid. And it does that by looking at the header to payload and communicating with Cognito to see if the signature that was included is actually valid. If the token is validated, you then get access to your data sources, right? So AppSync interacts with your data sources using your resolvers. How does it look when we use Amazon Cognito Identity Pools with IAM? So the interaction is kind of similar, but a bit different. So the first part is the same. You've got to authenticate. Then Cognito User Pool returns JWT token. The interesting part is that your application can then request AWS credentials from Amazon Cognito Identity Pools, right? Amazon Cognito Identity Pools will do the same thing. It will validate the ID token, make sure that the ID token is valid, contains the right information, and that it can vend credentials back to the application. When that is done, temporary AWS credentials are returned to your mobile application. The mobile application can then call the AppSync API by signing its request with the AWS credentials that have been returned. So if you've interacted with AWS services, you've probably heard of SIG-v4. That's what we're going to do there. We're going to take your access token, your session token, and we're going to use that to actually sign to request. When that request arrives at AppSync, AppSync is actually going to check with the IAM service to make sure that the request is valid. Was it properly signed? Does it conform with what should be expected? So that is a check done with IAM. And then at that point, if everything checks out, you have access, AppSync accepts the request, and you get access to your resolvers. So you have two different ways of accessing AppSync. You can access it with a Java Web Token through Cognito User Pools, and you can access it with your IAM credentials. So you may ask yourself, when should I use which method? Well, it really depends on what you're building and how you're interacting with AppSync. If you are interacting with a mobile application and just want to get access to AppSync, Java Web Token may be all that you need. But let's say you're building an application where your mobile application is interacting with AppSync, but you also have backend services that are interacting with AppSync. And those backend services are using AWS credentials to access AppSync. At that point, you're going to have to configure your AppSync API to use IAM credentials, right? So you can have your backend services access AppSync with credentials, and then with AWS credentials, and then your mobile application can also access AppSync with those credentials. There's also a couple of other advantages of using IAM credentials. So this is an overview in IAM Policy Detail. So this is a policy that you would configure for your users to access AppSync. So this is a standard policy format for IAM. You have a statement here, and the statement actually dictates what a user can do. So the effect of this statement is allow, meaning what we're going to specify here is allowed on the resource. So the actions that we specify are allowed for the resource. The specific action that we're calling here is AppSync GraphQL. So there are multiple actions that you can take against AppSync, but this is the only action that you can take when it comes to interacting with let's say, on the user plane, interacting with the API. It's AppSync GraphQL. And then you can specify your resource. So the resource is what we call an ARN, Amazon Resource Number, and it specifies specifically what you can access within the API. So the way ARNs are written is fairly straightforward. So we have ARN, AWS, AppSync denotes the service. Then we have the region, US West 2 in this case. Then you have an account ID. This is a fictional account ID. Don't try to access it. And then you have APIs, and then you would have your GraphQL API ID. If you go to the console, You can go into your settings of your API and grab the API ID from there. Then you can specify what is available for access. You can specify the types. So in this example, we say types to query. To query is one of the basic types for your GraphQL schema. And you can go all the way down to the fields. So you can say that in this query, this user that is using this policy can only access field 1, right? So that's pretty granular. So that's some pretty granular control. You could do the same thing on a mutation type. So let's say we have a mutation and we have a create post field into mutation. Using the IAM policy, we could restrict users to accessing specific mutation fields within AppSync. So that's one way of implementing fine-grained access control. Now, there are other ways that you can also do this. When I talk about fine-grained access control, is really being able to pinpoint resources that we want our users to access versus other things. One of the things that we can do in AppSync to implement fine-grained access control is to use the identity information that is available at the resolver. So when you use Amazon Cognito User Pool, we talked about the JWT token. The JWT token actually returns a whole payload that has a set of information. It'll have information that looks like this. And this information is actually available automatically at your resolver when you access the resolver and you've requested access to the resolver using a JWT token. So at the resolver, you'll have access to your subscriber ID, to issuer, to username, to claims associated with the user, to source IP, and to default authorization strategy. This information does not need to be sent by the user. So when you have a query or a mutation, you do not need to include this information in your request. This is automatically made available by AppSync into resolver. And because it's made available based on the information that Cognito says you have access to, we can use that information to make real authorization decisions, right? So we can use, when we get to sub information, which is an ID that represents the user, we can actually use that pretty confidently. We know that this represents the user. Same thing, if we're using Amazon Cognito identity pools and we're using IAM credentials to access our AppSync API, all of this information is made available at the resolver. So we get to account ID, to Cognito pool ID, to identity ID, to source IP, to username, and to user ARN. This is all information that is available into resolver. You can access this information. If you're saving information in DynamoDB tables, you can write this information to a DynamoDB table. So you can then make control decision based on this information. So for example, if you look at a typical flow, right, for fine-grained access control, you have your application, you get a token from Cognito User Pool, and you use it as an authorization header into request that is sent to AppSync, right? AppSync can then use this information to make conditional checks in your resolver, right? So should a user be able to access certain type of information? Should user A be able to access this information? Well, yes, the user can access the information if this data is actually tagged to user A. And we'll see how that can be done using things like DynamoDB. So this is one way you can implement fine-grained access control. Yes, question? Well, I think this is, so the question is, why are some companies reluctant to use the public cloud? So this is a question that really goes beyond just AppSync, right? You would have to look at what is each company looking at. The public cloud is definitely secure. We have a lot of companies, a lot of financial companies that are using the public cloud. So I would say that it's not really, that question is not really related to what's going on here. You would have to look at specific concerns that each company has, right? But credentials, this is more about just fine-grained control within AppSync resolvers. Well, you know, the other point that's being made is that it's a cultural issue why why financial companies don't want to use the public cloud. I think it's a discussion that we could go into in a lot of depth. You would have to see, you know, the claims that are made and other things. But the public cloud, AWS is definitely secure, right? If you've interacted with AWS and AWS services, security is always our #1 concern. That's why we're talking about Cognito and implementing security here. You know, that's the #1 concern. And when we implement solutions like this, when we implement services, we always look at security first, right? Okay, so maybe what I want to do at this point is take a quick look at how this actually looks, right? If we wanted to launch an application and actually make use of things like Cognito User Pool. So let me just show. I'm going to get out of this view real quick. Okay. Let me show this real quick. So I have an application here that's running. This is a very simple application. It's a React application that I've created using Amplify. I believe you've heard about Amplify earlier today. And it uses GraphQL AppSync backend. So, and again, it's a React application. I try to access the application, and I'm refreshing my screen here. This is the first thing I see. Full disclosure, I didn't implement this, right? This is Amplify's handiwork. But let's say I want to access this application. I've created a user in my user pool, and I'm going to sign in. Okay, incorrect username or password. Again, I didn't implement this, but I automatically get a response saying that the username is not correct. All right, so I'm logged in. I get this is a simple to-do app. I get, welcome back, John. The name was John. And it's telling me that I can add a task. I can add a task to get started. Before I do that, let me jump in here. I printed out some information about my Cognito user session, right? So I'm using Cognito to log into this application. I talked about the fact that after you authenticate, you are sent back some JWT tokens. You can actually print out that information, right? You can interact with the Amplify SDK authentication module to get this information. So I printed it out here. So it's a Cognito session. I have an access token, an ID token, and a refresh token. I can actually drill into my access token. JWT token, it has a payload. You see all of this information, client ID, event ID, the authentication time, scope, the issuer, which is Cognito IDP, and the token use. I can use this token for access. I also have an ID token. Same thing as a JWT token, and here's the payload. And the payload is actually just decoded information from this string here. Let's say I copy this information. I can actually go to this website, JSON Web Tokens. If you're not familiar with it, I would definitely bookmark it, and you can explore this at length. But it's essentially a site that introduces you to Java Web Tokens and what they are. I'm going to just paste my information here. And so this is the content of the token. This is base64 encoded, and I have a header. You can easily make out the different parts. There's a header followed by a period, full stop. Then there's a payload, and followed by a period, and then there's a signature. And so what this page does is just decodes information. And you see the header information. It tells you how this was encrypted and what key ID was used for this specific token. And then you have all of your payload information here. So this is just following the standards, fairly easy to see what's going on here. And then you have your signature. This is a signature. You could verify this signature if you go to, this is what Cognito would do into backend, try to verify that the signature that's included here actually matches the data that's included here. That's how Cognito knows that the information is actually correct. But so that's what that is. So if I come back here, I have my tokens. So now let's say, and it's saying that I don't have a task, right? Let me just take a look at my networking tab. But you do see that we made request. So if I go to GraphQL, this is a GraphQL request that was made. You can kind of see what happened here. We made a request to this URL. This is the URL of my API. I was trying to list my to-dos, and if you look at the response, I didn't get any items because I don't have anything in there. What's interesting is you can look at the request headers, and you see that this authorization header is essentially just my token. So we just included the token into header, and that was sent, and we get access to the API. If I were to just take this by itself, and let's say try to access it, it tells me errors, unauthorized exception, missing authorization header, right? So that's all that's going on here. We're just adding our authorization header. All of this is done over HTTPS, of course, encrypted using TLS. But the header is what gives us access to the API, right? So let's say I want to add a task. I add a task, pops up here. You see that there's some back and forth being done with Cognito automatically, but then I have another request that's being sent here, right? Create to do, I created it, I've got work to do, and some more to do as well. This is very simple task. But these are John's tasks, right? All I did was create it. You can see the content of my mutation request. The variable is just named work to do. That's what I had here. That's all I included, work to do. Let me go and sign into this application with another user. Just refresh this. I'm not signed in, so I don't have access to it. I have another user. This is me this time around. And I sign in. Now I come in here. I'm pulling all of the tasks, but I'm not seeing tasks. I'm not seeing John's tasks, right? I can create, same deal. If I come down here and you look at my request was just pulling all of the list to-dos. But I've incorporated some authorization around these requests to only allow the specific user's request to be sent back. So how is that actually done, right? We can go into the console and take a look at our resolvers. So I'm going to come here, and this is, I'm going to make this big. This is the schema, SFO loft task. I can go to my settings down here. You see this is the API and the API ID. It's set up with Amazon Cognito User Pool. And so what I did, I just came down here, I specified the region, I specified the user pool, and the default action is to allow everything for this user pool specifically. Then I look at my schema. My schema is a pretty simple schema. It was actually created using Amplify, the Amplify CLI. And to show you what that looks like, when I created my schema, all I did was this. I just said this. I said, I want a schema with a to-do, and I added this directives to the schema. I added a model directive, which just says that I want to persist this in DynamoDB. And then I added an auth directive. And the rule for this auth directive just says, allow the owner to access this, the to-do type, which means that the owner is allowed to take make CRUD operations against this type. So create, write, create, read, update, delete. Only the owner of the task can do that. And when using Amplify CLI, this gets compiled. If you look at what it generates, it's actually all this, right? But the cool thing about the CLI is that I don't really need to worry about all of this. I can really just focus on what am I trying to represent? What am I trying to restrict access to? What am I trying to interact with? And not really deal with the finer details of deploying a full-scale GraphQL schema. And so we can look at the mutations. So what I'm using is to create to-do. If I go into the create to-do, you can look at this ownership information that's being done here. So I told you that there was some information that is available to you when you use Cognito User Pools. This is available into identity object, into context in AppSync, and we automatically get to username. So when we try to create a mutation, the first thing that is done is we check to see, is there a username into identity? And if not, we just throw an error and we say this is not authorized. If there is, we continue, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna just add an owner field to this mutation. So we're persisting to owner information to our DynamoDB table. And this is what is gonna associate the specific data set that we're writing to a specific user. If I go to my DynamoDB table associated with this resolver, it's a to-do table resolver, data source. And I can get there by going to my data sources. I have a to-do table. I click on to-do. I come into DynamoDB. I click on items. And I can see that it inserted all of this information. And here is what you see. John, and Brice, right? So the owner name, the owner username is also associated with each data entry in this DynamoDB table. And so one thing that you'll notice is that we're using this information, but this is not information that's provided by the user. This is provided by the system. This is verified information about the owner that we can then use to make decisions, decisions about what to write and what to get access to. So if I go back to the schema and I look at my query, what I'm doing is listing the to-dos. And if I look at the to-do table, so I'm fetching all of the information. This is a list. It's a scan of the table, and it's fetching all of the information. But before returning this information, it's actually going to do a check. It's going to make sure that all of the owner fields of the data that is being returned matches the identity of the owner that's making the request. That way, we only send back the information that is specifically associated with the owner. And that's one way that you can use this information to actually make decisions about what to save, what to write, and what to allow customers to read. Now, if we want to look at how we implemented all this, this is a very simple example, but there's two key things that we looked at. We looked at authentication. When you first access the website, the application, you don't have access to it unless you've signed in, right? And then after you've signed in, you can use the JWT tokens that are returned to actually get authorization to use your AppSync API. Then within the AppSync API, you can use that information to make decisions about what a user can actually, how a user actually writes data, and what information a user can actually retrieve from the resolvers. So we can take a quick look at how this was put together. As I mentioned, the application is fairly simple. One of the things we did to get started with this, if you're going to write, for example, a React application, there's a couple of basic things that you want to do. You want to import Amplify and Auth. You probably talked about this today, into Auth module for Amplify. We have our AWS mobile settings that we import. We're importing this high order component from React. This is the with authenticator. And this with authenticator, we can wrap our application with this component, as you see here. And when we wrap our application with this component, it's going to ensure that we only get access to our application after a user has signed in. If a user has not signed in, it's going to show the sign-in screen, right? So that's what we did there. Another thing to look at, so this is a React application, and we're using the component did mount. So this function is called every time the application is mounted. And so the first time the application is mounted, I can use the auth module to get the current session information from Cognito. This is an asynchronous call, so we have it in this async await setup. And when the information is returned, we just save it to the state. Then, because we're doing a render, anytime the state is updated, a re-render is triggered, and then we print out the session information. So this is essentially the majority of what's going on here. And then if you remember, I had the welcome back message. Well, we're just checking here to see if the session has been set. We're getting the session from the state on this line. And if the session has been set, we just print out this welcome back message. We go into the session, we look at the ID token, we check the payload, and then within the payload object, we return the value of the Cognito username key. That's it, fairly simple. So to implement the sign-in, sign-up, I really didn't have to do anything, right? This is one of the best tools that we have in our toolkit, really, if you want to implement an application. Just put your application around with Authenticator, and you're ready to go. You don't really need to know anything about implementing Auth. This is something that's implemented by our team. It's secure. It's using the Cognito API, right? Then when we want to set up our client to talk with the AppSync backend, fairly simple. We just call the AWS AppSync constructor, and we pass it information about our AppSync backend, the URL, the region, and then for Auth, we specify the JWT token, and here we're using this pretty nifty formula here. Again, we're calling Auth the current session. This is the same thing that we were doing below. We call it in await, and then we get the ID token, and then we get the JWT token. And that, our AppSync API is going to automatically insert that into request as an authorization header. So that is also done for you. You don't need to do anything specific about that. Yes, question? Is there a reason you should use the ID token instead of the access token? So it depends on how things are set up. For AppSync, we use the ID token. So the ID token can be used for authorization. In our case, the access token, if you were to use, you could use it if you wanted to do authentication towards another system, or if you wanted to use it to gain access to Cognito itself, to the Cognito User Pool, to modify your attributes. So they're used for two different things. They are similar, but they're used for two different things. The access token has scope information, OAuth scope information that you can, so this is the type of information that's returned. For example, if you're gonna use Facebook, right, to authenticate, Facebook will return to you scope information. It actually tells you kind of the scope of access that a user has, and then you can use that to get access to different parts, limited parts. The ID token has information about the user, and then has attributes from the user pool, right? But it doesn't have scope information, right? And similarly, the access token doesn't have all of the user information. So they're used for different types of access. Okay, let me get back here. So this was an example on how to get started with Amplify. I highly recommend using Amplify if you want to get started. It was a very simple project. All I did was use the Amplify CLI to create this. I really didn't put much information in it, and I created that very simple schema that you saw, right? And then from my command line, I can simply call the Amplify push to push all of my information. Then this is one of the things that we looked at. So if I want to add Auth with Amplify, I would simply call Amplify add Auth in my project, and this is the typical setup that you would have. All right. And then to interact with AppSync, this is also, I talk about these as the 4 easy steps to get started with AppSync and Amplify is to follow this pattern. Yeah, question? So the question is, do we have examples of this on GitHub? We definitely have a to-do example on GitHub. We have an event example on GitHub. The easy thing to do is if you go into the AppSync console, and I'll actually just show you this, you can easily get started just by going to the console. Because we allow you to just launch. So let me go here. Okay, sorry, because I can't see the screen here. Where's my, okay. So if you go to, if you want to create an API, you can use our create wizard, and then you have a couple of apps. So you have this event app that you can get started. You have a task app. This is a very simple task app similar to this. You have a chat app. I actually wrote this one, and we will, if you're going to be here tomorrow, we'll be doing a lab on how to actually put this together from scratch. But then you can read, you can click this here, come to the samples. It tells you specifically what to do. You can come down here. This is AppSync Chat App Starter. Tells you specifically how to get started. So yes, so this is the quick way to get started. Come and use the API. The console. The cool thing about this is that it will actually deploy all of the resources for you. So just with one click, it will deploy everything you need, and then you can easily interact with it. Okay, so just to wrap up, if you're going to use AppSync with Cognito and you want to use and you want to easily get started, these are the 4 easy steps to configure AppSync. The first thing you want to do, you want to import your modules. There's some key modules to import AWS AppSync, AWS AppSync React, and your AWS exports. Right, this is your configuration information. The second thing you want to do is configure the client. You can look at our blogs and our information on how to do this, but you essentially call the AWS AppSync client. You specify to URL, to region, and to authentication. The third thing to do, if you're going to do advanced kind of complex handling, you can specify your complex object credentials. This is essentially specifying the credentials to access our other AWS services directly, like S3, that require AWS credentials. And if you're going to interact with GraphQL interfaces and GraphQL unions, there's also some additional configuration that you have to do. 90% of the time, you don't have to do this, but this is kind of some advanced configuration. Then finally, step number 4, you want to wrap your application in this higher order component, which is the with Authenticator. So if you look at the steps, you want to make the client available to the provider. You want to load app data from the storage. This is the rehydrate call. You want to launch your app when it's ready. This is step C. And then you want to make sure that you require authentication by wrapping it into with Authenticator. Follow those 4 steps, and you're ready to go with a secure API, with authorization step set up, and with sign in, sign up configured for your application. All right. That's really all I had today. I think we covered quite a bit. We covered identity, authentication, authorization, and accessing your AppSync API using Cognito, either Cognito User Pool or Cognito Identity Pools with IAM credentials. So hopefully, I hope this was some good information and that you learned quite a bit. So Thank you. Are there any questions about the content? Anything, questions that you have? Yeah. You received, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, it will be the same. Okay, so the question is, if you do social sign-in with Facebook or with Google or with something else, do you receive the same type of tokens? And the answer is yes. You will receive an access token, an identity token, and a refresh token. Yes, and so the other question, the follow-up question is the logic the same? And essentially, yes, the logic is the same, and that's why Cognito is a very deep service. But if you notice, we didn't pay attention to what's going on beyond Cognito. There's a lot of different flows that can happen behind Cognito if you're doing SAML or federation or other type of setups. But what happens there doesn't impact how you're going to access your API. So different flows, depending on if you're doing business to business, business to consumer, business enterprise. But the access to AppSync, that is the same, that remains the same after authentication has been done. Yeah, yeah, sure. By by role. So the question is, when I showed the DynamoDB table and the resolver, we were doing authorization based on the username. And the question is whether or not we can use the role. What type of role are you thinking about? Yes, yes. Yes. So I showed you one example, but you can also do authorization based on groups. So users could be part of different groups, or like you could have an admin group, or you can have developer groups. You can have users part of these different groups, right? The group information is also available in your resolver. So you could also say, you can also direct your resolver to say, only let members of this group access this information. That is also possible. Well, yeah. So the question is, could you do it with an actual role, like an IAM role? Maybe. But it really depends to how you're mapping your attributes. So the question is, like, could it be a more specific role? It depends to how you're mapping your attributes. You could map your attributes to groups, or you could use your custom attributes. You could specify these roles in a custom attribute and then use those as well. So the key thing is that the information is available, and you can definitely use it for conditional checks and to make authorization decisions. So yes, you can do that. Then if you want to use IAM roles, because with IAM roles you have policies, you could specify into policy only grant access to this specific field in a mutation or in a query, right? You could also do that. So the question is, are the user pool kind of secure and segregated? The answer is yes. So each user pool is independent. You can create multiple applications within a user pool. You can specify who has access to the different applications. But yes, a user pool is an isolated, secure entity. It has no relationship with other user pools. So we do not support that functionality right now. We have mechanisms that you could use to migrate users, but we do not have a push-button export user pool at this moment. So you can use, so the question is, how could you migrate? Well, you could use things like your Lambda hooks, so that every time somebody signs in, you catch that information and you migrate them to another data source or to another identity pool, if you wanted to do that. So that's right now, that may be a bit of a limitation, but we've added these custom hooks. I talked about the Lambda hooks. That's part of the reason we added those, so that on sign in and sign up, you can actually cache that information. And
So if I already have a directory of users, there is no way
so the question, if you currently have a directory of users, no, there's currently no way to export those users. There are hacks, yes.
And because of password security,
Yeah.
you can't just copy everything over. And it's not about the hooks of authenticating them and then actually using the hooks to kind of create a new user at the same time and then capture that information. So that basically make them re-log in and authenticate and then create that new Cognito user at the same time. And he says there's no way for
Yeah.
our team to like come up with that solution as far as disaster recovery or cloning or copying those users over.
Any other questions? Yes.
So how do we integrate authentication when we have to do it with Active Directory or Index?
So with Active, the question is, how do you integrate authentication when you have to do it with Active Directory? Using Cognito User Pool, you can specify your different IDPs. You can go into the console. We have an integration for that. You essentially specify the IDP information, specify the sign-in return token, because we're going to redirect you to a specific URL. You specify the URL that the user should be redirected back to, and same thing for sign out. So we have a whole flow on how to set that up. Any other questions? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Awesome, everybody. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for joining.